Welcome to the SOB radio show, where we have fun, interesting guests, and hot topics. Each week, we offer insights into music, fashion, health, fitness, and humor. Do you have the perfect guest for us to interview? I want to know. Drop me a line on our Facebook page at SpunkyOldBroad1 or reach out to me on our website at SpunkyOldBroad.com. And now, back to the show.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Gail, SOB, Spunky Old Broad. And I'm going to ask you if you would subscribe to my Spunky Old Broad channel on YouTube. That would be helpful to me. And I have a terrific guest today. Very unusual. I'm going to ask her a couple of questions that I really was not familiar with. Her name is Dr. Sara Gerber. She's the 2018 recipient of the Influencers in Aging designation by PBS's Next Avenue. She's an author, a certified retirement coach, and professional speaker on retirement and aging. She's the author of the 2018 book, Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers, a retirement and aging roadmap for single and childless adults, which was selected as a best book on aging well by the Wall Street Journal. She's a regular contributor to Forbes.com on the topics of aging and retirement, and is on the advisory team for Nexus Insights, a consultancy and think tank on the future of aging. Wow, Sara, I have so many questions for you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Gail. I'm happy to be here.
How do you get to be a certified retirement coach? I have not heard of that before.
There are several certification programs that you can go through. When I did it back in 2010, I went through a program called Retirement Options. And that was before we had Zoom, and I did it all by phone. I had done a lot of coaching with my work in organizational development and leadership development, but I really needed to learn something about the whole retirement transition, the psychology of it, the sociology of it. So that was what the program taught me, and combining those two felt like a very natural thing for me.
That's fantastic. And then the fact that you wrote this book, which was, I can't believe, I mean, this is a real kudo, best book on aging well by the Wall Street Journal. And the fact that it's, catered to those who are alone at the point of aging. So let's start by defining solo aging for us.
Sure. When I first recognized that solo aging was going to be an issue, I defined it as anyone, single or married, who didn't have children. My husband and I do not have kids, and I was really quite amazed when I got into my late 50s, early 60s, that so many of my friends and work colleagues and just people I knew all over the place were spending a tremendous amount of time taking care of their aging parents. And I was having a glass of wine with a friend one day, and I said to her, she doesn't have children either. I said, who's going to do that for us? And that's when we looked at each other and went, well, there isn't anyone. So I realized that the phenomenon needed a name, and so I coined the term solo agers, and that was my definition of a solo ager. Well, once I started talking about it and writing about it, people came to me in quite large numbers and said, no, solo aging shouldn't be limited just to people that don't have children, because there are a lot of people out there whose children today live 3,000, 6,000, 9,000 miles away, or they're estranged, or they kind of failed to launch appropriately. So they just can't be counted on for one reason or another, and those people feel like they're solo agers too. So I expanded the definition, and now really anyone who feels like they are aging alone and will be aging alone probably should spend a great deal of time and energy thinking about making sure their future is safe and secure.
Wow, that's so deep, because I agree. I mean, one of my kids is in Alabama and the other one is in California, and I'm in Florida right now. Of course, my guy in California can't wait to get me out there. He said, "Mom, this is where you need to be. I need to be close to you." But so far so good, and I enjoy being alone. So I don't have a problem with it. But I do know. I remember my mom, who we were all very close in our family. In fact, she spent 35 years with me in Florida from October to March,
Hmm.
keeping warm. And, she would tell me stories of people on her street, where she was living, whose kids never talked to them. They never came to see them. And it was so different. And then with my sister, well, not everybody, not all the grandkids, but the entire family is really right where she is, and they get together every Sunday. They switch houses every week, and they get together and talk, and they socially distance, of course, but they're a very close group. So why did it become such a big deal to you, though, to find out, hey, there's this whole group of people out there that nobody's talking about?
Well, for starters, I am part of that group, and so that was a motivational factor. But also, I started digging into some of the research that had been done on older adults and on just kind of the demographics of different generations. And one of the things I pretty quickly discovered was a research report that had been done by the Pew Research Group using the census as the basis of their data gathering, and discovered that among baby boomer women, almost 20% never had children. That's an astonishing figure,
Yeah.
considering that it's twice what it was in all previous generations.
Do you
Now,
think
if
it's
you,
by choice, Sarah? Did you find out whether it was by choice or by physicality, or what was the reason for it?
well, it's it's multifold, of course. The rate of infertility among women is probably somewhere up around 7 or 8%. And then you have people who, because their partners can't have kids, they end up not having children. Of course, there is, excuse me, of course, there is adoption and other ways to have children. But the fact, if you look at what was happening in the late 60s and early 70s, it really tells the tale of how much of it was actually by choice. During that time period, number one, we got the pill. And the pill finally allowed women to really be in control of their reproductive functions. They didn't have to depend on other forms of birth control that were less reliable. And the pill was extremely reliable back then. It actually was much stronger than the pills that women get today. Also, we had the push for the Equal Rights Amendment, which never totally passed, but the changes that the forces that came to be on women's liberation and equal rights for women changed the world forever. All of a sudden, in the 60s and 70s, especially into the 70s, doors were opening for women that had always been shut to them. They could go to the best universities. They broke through to the Ivies. They were able to get jobs and pursue careers that had never been very open to women before. We had a smattering of women doctors back. I had a woman doctor when I was young. I had a woman pediatrician. That was so unusual. Most doctors and lawyers and other high-paying professions, scientists, engineers, none of that was really available to women before the 70s and into the 80s. So women for the first time had an opportunity to say, I don't think I'm going to be a mom because I have a lot of other options and that's not my first calling. So a great many women chose to have a career rather than have children. some decided a little later in life that they could do both. And so we have a lot of late in life mothering going on with that generation, but still, that those statistics were developed at a time when the youngest baby boomers were about 44. That's pretty much the end of childbearing years.
Yeah, I
And
mean, yeah, I can,
so,
yeah, I mean, I know I went into business in 1959, and there were very few women in business, and I was very lucky that I was successful. And of
mhm,
course, 99% of the people I dealt with were men, but I never had an issue. Of course, I never worked in corporate America either, but it
mhm.
brings back what you're talking about, brings back the days of Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she couldn't get a job in the law firm, and
Yeah.
you know, and look what she achieved. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of all of that that goes on, Sarah. And but there are some important challenges you talk about. You say there are three that are the most important, and I would think, of what they will face. And of course, one of them I would imagine is illness. I mean, if they're going through this alone.
Yes, of course. And today it's in our face all the time. What happens if I'm living alone and I get COVID? Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to even transport me to the emergency room? So I encourage single women who don't have children, at least in the nearby area, to make make agreements with friends that they will watch over one another and care for one another and be available with a phone call to at least call 911 and make sure their friend is taken care of. So there are so many things that we can do. All of the women who have enjoyed and are still enjoying wonderful independent lives, enjoying, as you said, living alone, we've reaped a lot of benefits from having equal rights in these last few decades. It's been, I like to say, it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride, and it will continue to be as long as possible. But the fact is that our world becomes a little smaller as we age. And maybe that doesn't start happening until you're in your late 80s, 90s. I know people in their late 90s that are still living on their own and doing pretty well. But if you look at, again, if you look at the statistics, about 70% of us are going to need some kind of assistance at some point in our lives.
Well, that's true,
So,
Sarah. I think, it's good to have I guess you're calling a buddy system, really. And,
mhm.
calling each other every day to make sure everything is okay, or every other day, or however the check ins are. And of course, as you say, of course, some people can afford to have a caretaker. Some people can afford to have somebody come in a couple of times a week, and there are others who cannot. But what are some of the other challenges you find that solo agers have?
Well, the challenges, uh, I like to think of them really as planning, kind of an agenda if you're a solo ager. And COVID aside for a moment, there's kind of a three-legged stool that I think solo agers need to develop for themselves. And one is a robust and updated frequently estate plan so that you really have developed a plan for that includes not only your will and maybe a trust, but also your advance directive, who's going to make decisions for you if and when you cannot for some reason, and powers of attorney. So I go into a fair amount of detail in some of my articles about that, and certainly in my book. So I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail here, but just to suffice it to say, a robust estate plan is very, very important. And then your finances are also important. Seeing a financial advisor, if only a couple times, to figure out where you are financially. Are you going to be able to sustain your lifestyle for the rest of your life, considering what's coming in and what's going out? Um, so that's important, to make sure that you are going to be okay financially. And if not, to make some changes now so that you will be okay in the future. Some people are happily spending much more than is sustainable. And that needs to change if you don't want to end up broke and unable to
Well,
help
isn't that
yourself
the
when you need
American
it.
way, though, Sarah? Spend more than you make. I mean, that's kind of a joke. Uh,
Yeah, but amazing how many people do.
yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things here. First of all, I think people who are alone don't necessarily even think about an estate plan because if they don't have, let's say, close relatives,
Hmm.
um, they just they don't even think about it because they're not thinking about, well, who should I leave this to, or who would want this, or so forth. I know that I was the designated executor for one of my dear friends' estates. She was alone. She was
Hmm.
divorced. She had no children. Was a very, very successful business person, and so I did what she wanted me to do. Some of it was good. Some of it I questioned, but she knew what she wanted, and that was fine. And she also could afford a full-time caretaker, which is what she needed. And she had a financial advisor. So are those the so you said there are three things. One is the
Hmm.
estate plan, one is the financial advisor. What is the third?
The third is to have a community, and I think that's the most important of the three. And when I say a community, I mean people who live near you and who you are close to and who you communicate with a lot, so that you are not alone. Because again, as we get older, our world tends to shrink. We don't think it's going to. We just, especially the
Right.
baby
Well,
boom
Sara,
generation,
yes,
just
correct.
goes
Correct.
blithely along, kind of being Peter Pan. But eventually, we will need help. And especially for those who can't afford live 24/7 live-in help, we're going to need to work together. We're going to need to, in many cases, live together. I'm a huge fan of things like home sharing and co-housing, and forming communities wherever you are. If you live in a multi um, they call it multifamily housing. It's anything from apartments to condominiums. If you live in something like that, by all means, get to know your neighbors. Have meals together, go to movies together, have happy hour once a week. Do whatever is necessary to really start to get to know one another on a deeper level, so that you be and community builds as you get to know each other. It can feel artificial at first. There may be some people you're not crazy about, but the more you get to know them, the more you'll come to understand them, and they you. So
Well, that's the advantage of the adult living communities and the over 55 communities. And I know that another one of my friends who unfortunately passed away was very high class. I mean, most people could not afford it, but she was in a very high class adult community, and they, had this communal dining room, so people
mhm.
got to know each other, and they had all these events. But what was interesting, they had that section, and then they also had an assisted living section, and then they also had a nursing home section. So if you went from one to the other, you were in that same community all the time because, they had all the different facilities. And it's interesting to see how many of these adult communities have sprung up. And you said a very important thing, and that is get to know your neighbors. I mean, I am amazed with me, for example, Sarah. I live in a high rise and I really didn't know anybody, but I have had neighbors come out of the woodwork and give me their phone numbers and say if you ever need anything. And one day I opened up my door and there were 24 rolls of toilet paper there because one of my neighbors decided that's what I needed. And I mean, these are people that I didn't even know. So sometimes by being in a community like that, you are really amazed by some of the good deeds that these people do. And, you mentioned co-housing and, co-home sharing. I had not heard of that until about 4 or 5 years ago. And I am amazed how many people do home share. They're like roommates, they didn't know each other before, but now they do. And they look out for one another. And it's really worked out quite good.
Yes, absolutely. It's home sharing has become a much bigger deal. I'm really thrilled to see that. There are a number of online companies that actually help match people. My favorite one, the one I'm most familiar with, is called Silver Nest, and that's easy to find online. But there are many others. Some of them serve just a local population, and some of them, like Silver Nest, are nationwide and can match people in any geography. So that's certainly one way. The other thing I wanted to say about community is that now I've just lost my train of thought on community, but it is so important. It's probably to me, it's the most important leg of that three-legged stool, because without a community behind you, you really have nothing to fall back on. Eventually, most of us have to quit driving. Very few people feel safe driving once they get into their 90s. I have many friends who have given up driving in their 60s. If you don't have public transportation nearby, that's also an issue. So there's a lot of articles written in the last 10 or 20 years about the beauty of living in an urban environment where there's lots of public transportation and you're living closer to your neighbors. Of course, right now in COVID, that's kind of all in question.
Yeah,
but I think we all need to think beyond COVID.
One of the things that's at least available now, and it's certainly cheaper than owning a car, is Uber and Lyft, because you can get where you need to go, and you don't have to worry about gas and insurance and license tags and car payments and all the rest. Because I've added up what it cost me to have a car, and it's certainly cheaper if I was just using Uber. Not as convenient, but certainly less expensive. We have just about 3 minutes left in this segment, Sara, and I want to really bring to home what you have said in terms of the things that solo agers have to think about. I hope those of you who are listening, who may be one of those people, have done some estate planning and have talked to a financial advisor. And, by having this community, which has, taken a hit, Sara, we have to think about this in COVID, because you can't gather. I mean, you have to be socially distanced, and everybody needs to wear a mask. And so it's put a damper on some of that. But still, if you pay attention to those things, it's beneficial. So, and I think that the idea of the living arrangements that you've talked about are so important. And there are people that are brought together who never knew each other before. So these services that you've mentioned, like Silver Nest, I think is fantastic. So we have about a minute left. Is there anything that you'd like to mention in this segment before we take a break?
Well, I want to mention that if you're thinking about home sharing, think Golden Girls. That's kind of the model for it.
That's true. And were they three different characters?
And we can all do that.
Characters with Mama there too. Wow, that is so true. That is so true when you think of all the various characters and their interests and their backgrounds and so forth. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything that was more diverse than Rose and I chuckle because, of course, it was supposed to be held in Miami Beach, but it was shot in California, and but they would show the the waterway in Miami Beach, and then my home was there. So always I was looking now, is that my house? Is that my house? So it was really, really interesting. Well, hold on, folks. We're talking with Dr. Sara Zeff Gerber, and we will be back in just a few minutes.